Welcome back to Technically Challenge, and in this video I wanted to start a series of videos on what I would describe as essential JavaScript. So why do I want to do a series on essential JavaScript? Well, I think one of the biggest challenges with learning how to code is you learn too much of information that you don't need or wouldn't really use. And so I've been reflecting on what parts of JavaScript I use most regularly in my job and in my previous jobs, and I want to share what are the essentials of the things that I use regularly, and hopefully this may benefit you in some way if you're either learning or coming from another language and you want to just learn kind of the essentials of JavaScript to kind of get on the get your feet on the ground running. So let's jump in. If you're new to coding and you don't have a code editor yet, I'd recommend getting VS Code. If you go to code.visualstudio.com, you can download it for free. It's a really great tool. I'll be using this as my examples. Now, you see the example that we have here. I'm going to start by talking about the concept of types. We'll go through a lot of different things, but this video will be just on types. And there might be some other stuff that you don't understand, like this console.log or things like that. We'll talk more about that kind of stuff later. But what we want to talk about particularly is this concept of types. And today, specifically, we'll be talking about primitive types. Primitives. So those are number, string, Boolean, undefined, null, big int, which is a newer one, and symbol. Now these last two here, I have not needed or had to use in the last number of years that I've been coding JavaScript. They do come in handy for different things, but I won't touch on them much because I don't think they're essential, but I will describe a basic way to use them. So let's jump in to numbers. In this example, I just have something here to print out. So I'm in the folder where I have a file saved, and it's types.js. And if you don't have Node installed on your computer, you can install Node, and then once you've installed it, you can run something like Node and then the file name, and then it'll output I am a string in this case. So that's a string. We'll talk about that in just a second. So I could have like a number here, and if you save it and then run it, it'll give you 100. So numbers, can be 100, it can be 0, it could be a negative number, negative 1,000, print that out, something like that, right? It could be infinity, which is an odd number, but it is a number in JavaScript. It could be mainly like those are the types of things you'd be using numbers for. And so what's cool about numbers is you can do, arithmetic, right? So you can do something like 2 plus 3, and that gives you 5. You can do 6 divided by 2, and that gives you 3. You can do 3 exponent 3. It's actually stars. And that gives you 27. In programming, there's something called a modulus operator. So it's also kind of called the remainder operator. So if you were wanting to find the remainder of a number, this should give us 1, right? So I could do the modulus and get whatever the remainder is, which can be helpful for various things with math. So those are numbers. You can use all the multiplication. I don't think I did that yet. Subtraction, whatever. It does all those types of things. So that's number. It's a primitive type. It's a basic type in JavaScript, and you can do all kinds of things with it. Strings. Strings can actually be defined with three different types of quotes. You've got the double quotes, single quotes, and backticks. So pairs of these quotes will allow you to store a string. What is a string? A string is basically like a chain or a string of characters. So characters or symbols or anything that is kind of text. So I am a string is a string, but this also works with single quotes, which is not every language supports, and it also works with backticks. And we can run that, and those are all identical. One thing that you might run across, if you have, for example, double quotes, and you're trying to, if you were trying to write like, and they said, hello, you'll see this gets all messed up. My editor, VS Code here is telling me something's wrong. It's because I used a double quote inside of a double quote, which ends it. So then it just throws an error here. So if you wanted to actually show a double quote, one trick you can do is you can actually use the opposite quote that you want to display, and that will display those quotes for you. If you need to use double quotes or want to use double quotes, you can do something which is called escaping and use a backslash. And this works with certain types of characters, like if you want to display a backslash, for example. You see how backslash isn't being displayed? Well, let's say I wanted to display a backslash, and there's a lot of different characters. You could escape a backslash, and now it'll actually show you a backslash. So that's escaping. One other benefit, well, I'll give you another example. If you use single quotes and you do I'm a string, that doesn't work. But then if you do double quotes, because it's the opposite type of quote, it does work. All right, so that's just kind of a general principle of how strings work in JavaScript. And then lastly, backticks are really cool. They provide string interpolation. So if you have like a variable, which we haven't talked about yet, let name equals Bob. Hello, I am. You do this little syntax here, and you put name, and hello, I am Bob. It actually runs the code you have inside of these curly braces here. It's funny, name is deprecated. I don't know why it's doing that. That's funny. Person. I won't do that if I do person. Okay. Looks like TypeScript or something is running. But yeah, so we can do let person equal Bob, and then console.log, hello, I am $, curly braces person, and it actually runs that code. And we can see it actually puts Bob in the place of where this variable was. We'll talk about variables in another section. But that's strings, a couple different types of it. There's this caveat of this thing called escaping when you have like special characters. And that's just a quick summary. Another thing we have is a concept called Boolean. And a Boolean is really simple. It's just true or false. It's some sort of state or logic operator that we will use for true or false values. So if you were making a game and it was like, is the game running? You'd maybe write a variable that said is running, and if it was true, that would tell you that the game is running, and if it was false, it would tell you that the game is not. You can use true and false Booleans for so many different uses. They're used, kind of computers themselves are built on this concept of Booleans, so really helpful. But yeah, that's a quick summary of the Boolean operator, or the Boolean type that we have in JavaScript. We also have something called undefined, which kind of by its name means that this thing has not been defined yet. Usually, JavaScript defaults certain values to undefined, and it's kind of like this idea of the absence of a value, and it's very similar to the concept of null, which is also the absence of a value. The biggest difference is null is usually me explicitly saying there's no value here, maybe no value here yet, whereas undefined is kind of like a system-provided default of there's no value here. So we'll come back to this more when we come into talking about, equality in JavaScript and truthy and falsy values, but that's just a quick overview of that. There's another concept that's a newer feature, a newer type. It's called big int. So big int is I'll give you an example of max safe integer. So JavaScript has this concept of a maximum safe integer. So if we log that number, it gives us this number. So what it's saying is, if you're using a normal number type, this is the largest value you can safely use regular numbers for before things start getting wonky. So if I do this value plus 1 and I run it, it gives me the correct value. But if I add 2 to this value, it gives me the same value again. And this is because the number type does not safely handle anything larger than this. And that's why JavaScript has this internal variable that's called max safe integer. This also works with negative numbers as well, and breaks as well, the same way. So what JavaScript has is this concept of a big int. So let's say I do the same. The way I can make a big int is by adding an n to the end of a normal integer. Integer is just another word for like a number, a whole number usually. And if I run this adds fine, which the previous value added correctly as well. But then if I add 2 and I'm using big int, you'll see that this correctly adds up and adds to 3 now. So big int can also do exponents as well, exponent notation. And it isn't something I've used much or needed to use. And usually there's also like number libraries you can use as well if you want to make sure your numbers are working correctly. But I'll just leave that as that. This is a big int value, and you can safely handle numbers that are larger with it, or smaller. Lastly, we're going to talk about symbol. Symbol is not something I've seen actually used very much. My symbol key. And so if I make a symbol and I print that symbol, it's created a symbol for me. One thing that's special about symbols is it always creates a unique value. So if I tried to make 2 with the same name and I tried to see if they're equal, which we have not talked about yet, we'll talk about in a future video. If I see if these are equal using the same key value, it's actually false. This is very similar to JavaScript's object notation. If you're familiar with objects, they don't equal each other as well, but it's always a unique value, so that's one gotcha. There's other things you can use symbols for, but since it's not essential, and that's the point of this video series, I'm not going to go into it. But there you have it. There are the 7 primitive types in JavaScript. Hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, or anything else you'd like to see as I jump into this series. Maybe you already know JavaScript and you have some essential ideas, throw them in the chat, because I haven't planned it all out yet. But yeah, let me know, and thanks for watching.